I'm James Priest, coming to you from my boat in Barcelona, and I'm joined today by Ashok Subramanian from India. Ashok is a good friend of mine the last years. We met back in 2015 through a mutual interest in Sociocracy, and I'm very pleased that he's joining us here today from Cochin in South India. I'm also particularly honored because just yesterday, Ashok's wife gave birth to their third child, a daughter, and despite that, he's kindly offered to be here for the call today. So thanks very much for joining us, Ashok. And I wonder if we could start off the call today just to give a little bit of background about you. So you're an NLP teacher, and you're actually considered one of the pioneers for NLP in India. And I wonder, could you tell us something about that, please, and about your work there?
Thank you, James, for this interview. It's great to meet you. After so many years. So I am into the field of NLP for the last 21 years. And I've been working primarily in the domain of healing people. Building excellence is what we say. So we are basically interested in studying unconscious habits that people bring without their awareness and help them become aware of that. And especially the ones which are not helping them go where they want to go in their lives. So that's the work that I do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. And you played quite an integral role in bringing awareness to NLP in India to begin with, right?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
So I started at the age of 21 as an NLP, interested student, and then now it's been 20 years, and it's like we've seen the other side of business now, which is like everywhere NLP and a lot of popularity right now. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, we met in 2015. First off, yeah. I was invited to India for an MVC conference, actually, and then on the back of that, also to share a workshop around the Sociocratic circle method, which I was teaching at that time. And you kindly collaborated on hosting that event and helping to organize it there in Cochin. It kind of sowed a seed, right? Because I remember at the time I was just a few weeks into exploring the potential of what went on to become S3. I came to India there, and we dedicated part of the Sociocratic Circle Method workshop to S3 instead. And I think that was the first group where I shared the ideas, actually, and what we were learning about S3 and thinking to put out there. So you were there right at the beginning in that sense. And since then, you also you invited me back. You and I went on an exciting tour, North India, Mid India, and South India as well, teaching about S3. And then you came over to Europe more recently as well to participate in the first practitioner course level 2, and hang out with us for another practitioner course level 1 as well. And I know that was really about developing some fluency for you around S3, because you've been introducing S3 in various ways in your work there and looking at synergies between NLP and S3 principles and patterns. So first off, could you just tell us something about what attracts you to S3 and why you've chosen to integrate it in your work?
Okay, to answer this question, I have to go back a little bit about my past. Okay. As an NLP trainer, we always have groups of students, and we form a community to develop ourselves. And I have been trying to manage a group of students several times in my past, and it would fall off. It wouldn't stay together, and there would be I wouldn't be able to figure out why and what it is. Okay, so that is on one side. On the other side, we are also constantly looking for what can give excellence to our lives, basically. Mm-hmm. So, and in that pursuit only, I ended up coming to the NVC conference, because I thought NVC had something new. And then we met there, and I hosted this workshop without having no idea about what is sociocracy, circle method, and any of this. But I hosted this workshop out of friendship, and because I was interested in NVZ and all that. But when I was attending the workshop with a sociocracy circle method, I obviously fell in love with your training, and I was not so feeling great about sociocracy circle method, because I was somewhere feeling it would not work for the work that I'm doing or in building communities. But the last part of it, when you talk about S3, I just jumped out of my chair, because I really felt this is what I was missing in building all my communities of group of students, and this was really somebody could navigate their way to the to the destiny, or to the way of where they need to flow. That was very evident in the way you talked about tension and navigating your tension, and that really said this is what I was looking for, without even knowing what I was looking for. So that is when I immediately invited you back, saying that I'm much more interested in what you're offering than the sociocracy circle method, because I saw a great future, because I found it directly applicable, and it was a pattern of excellence for me, from NLP sense. And then having been with you twice, thrice on these workshops, and watching what you did every time with people, and getting onto this, it really helped me to develop those skills, to work with communities. So that is one of the key reasons why I came into S3. And from an NLP point, we always look for things which are very practical and which are result bearing in the now.
That was one of the last workshops I ever taught around the Sociocratic Circle method, because that was in January, and in March I was so convinced by S3 and particularly the modular idea of taking individual patterns and synergizing them together and adapting to context, that I just made a big pivot and contacted everybody that I was meant to be delivering Sociocratic Circle method workshop to, and said I can't do that anymore. I can share about S3 instead, and I don't really know what it is yet, and I don't really know how to teach it yet, but I just know that I believe in it, and I think it makes so much more sense than what I've been sharing previously. So that was a time of great insight for me as well. So you and I, we've met several times and we've spoken a lot, and one thing that fascinated me was how you would talk about the relationship between S3 and NLP. So could you tell us something more about that?
So with NLP, we basically study unconscious patterns that people carry, which is part of their culture, family conditionings in the past. And sometimes these patterns do not allow them to go forward to places where they want to go in their lives. And many times people are caught up with that. They're not knowing, but they're just going in circles. So with NLP, we go and identify these patterns and help them break out of it. For example, we had a participant in the last course who had this ability of telling powerful stories. Okay. And whenever she wants to speak, she will go on to speak powerful stories. And the power stories would be so engaging that you end up listening to her. And now we would talk about this powerful story and that you're taking over power. We wouldn't use this term, but we would say that there is a storytelling habit that you have. But now when I'm coming from S3, I would say to her that your stories are beautiful, but can you tell me a sentence of what the story is all about, and would ask my permission before you tell the story. And that was like life changing for her, because when she goes back into her life, because she doesn't do this, many people go away from her not engaging, because they're not understanding this is what is happening. They feel angry because they're not able to talk, and this lady is thinking I am doing my best, but I am not able to engage in the conversation. So now this new practice really, this is really so. This I'm able to tell this because I'm looking from how much power is shared in the group, and in real time in the workshop. Then I listen to her story, and I'm able to connect this back to back. So without S3, I would have even talked about storytelling or, in any other format, but not in a very power sharing space. So, so this is the kind of work which is really, beautiful when we combine NLP and S3 together. NLP can identify limiting patterns. Okay. S3 can actually give you a bunch of new patterns which can replace these limiting patterns. So it's almost like you come back to the same model every time when everybody has a problem. Somebody talks fast, somebody doesn't talk, you come back to S3 because you say, okay, it's agreed upon. We will speak 10 minutes on this topic, so we will allot 10 minutes for you. Because if you just say 10 minutes, it wouldn't work. But because you give this independence to choose this timing within the group, this model really can fit in with any group.
I love it. So you're bringing equivalence into the group. In the case of the woman who told the stories, you invited her to consider the possibility of explaining something about, I guess, her motivation to share a story, and then checking if there would be any objections to doing so before she jumps in with it. So that gave her a way in to include others and to check for consent, basically. Very nice. And also talking about consciously time boxing activities. And through equivalence, rather than you as the course leader kind of leading everybody and setting constraints around these things, no stories, we take 10 minutes, instead inviting people into a collaborative process where they define constraints for themselves and then operate within those constraints and then evaluate whether that's appropriate or not and adjust accordingly, right? And navigating via attention accordingly.
Yes.
Okay.
So this is what we do, but these words, obviously because others do not have this experience of S3, but this is what exactly we do.
Yeah. So on that topic then, I often talk about S3 by stealth. And I think broadly speaking, there's two ways to pull in S3 with people who are unfamiliar with it. One is just to share about S3 and let people know that these patterns are there and the principles are there, and explain something of that and invite people to interact with those patterns. But then on the other side, sometimes that would be an inappropriate intervention to make for whatever reasons. And so then bringing S3 patterns in through being the change, integrating them into your facilitation, into your leadership within a group context, without actually naming the patterns or bringing any S3 terms or jargon, can be a much more approachable way for people to interact with these alternative ways of doing things, right? And so it's great to hear about that in your work, and like you say, there's a significant overlap between NLP and S3, because NLP is looking for those patterns and S3 is providing the alternatives. So I know that you're also, besides just running trainings around NLP, you're also very much involved in various aspects of community development. You work in the corporate sector, you work with NGOs, communities, education and schooling. So I wanted to open it up to you a little bit to just invite you to share a few examples of where else in your work you're pulling in S3 patterns, either by stealth or explicitly introducing those to people. If you could give us some examples.
I was invited by one of this biggest corporation in India who makes aeroplanes. Out of the 7 big aeroplane companies, this is one amongst them in the world. It's a Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, which is a government-based public sector company, and they have recently made a huge building for their management training, basically. And all this buildings has rooms which are in lecture mode, where people sit in desks after, desks behind, and then you go give a PowerPoint session, in that way. And when I had to offer my workshop, I wanted people to sit in a circle. Okay. And so we had to choose a room which was unfurnished in this whole 100 crore worth property. And then we had to do workshops in that format. Okay. And it really helped, because when people had to, when we had to take feedback, for example, rather than putting numbers and numericals and pushing it into a data, for me to allocate just 2 words from each person towards the end of the workshop. If I'm doing a 1-day workshop with them, at the end of the workshop to just give these 2 words, it really break the pattern of what was sitting in already. So it was like a big shocker. But at the same time, people speak and we get to hear each one's voices, and we are able to redesign what we need to do differently next time. So this is another example of how bringing in the S3 into a corporate training setup. One of the one of the comments that they brought back to me, one of the training manager told me that from PowerPoint, my training has helped them move to a flip chart, basically, because they have all considered moving from flip chart to PowerPoint as a progress. But now to come back from PowerPoint to flip chart was considered even more powerful, So to bring in this element of each person providing a time, each person's space, even in a group of 30, 40, when you do that in a very quick way, whether you raise your hand, whether you make this, you bring in a level of engagement of the trainees into the workshop very quickly. So it has its own advantages, but it is also a culture shock, because from one person talking to a group of people suddenly is like everybody having a say and everybody can block what is happening. So that gives another dimension. And to this day, they still hold that room, and they still have taken some trainings of what I do, and they're using it in that format.
In a circle.
In a circle, yeah.
Very nice. So there's bringing check-in at the beginning of the day and at the close of the day, bringing the concept of sitting in circle and the equivalence that brings between people, bringing the principle of consent, so that rather than just doing things to them, they have a say in actually what's happening, and a sense of participation in influencing the decisions that affect them. Yeah, and while it's not an S3 pattern explicitly, but bringing this analog element into a face-to-face environment, because I know a lot of teams and organizations where if they're privileged to be face-to-face, and that can become increasingly difficult in some contexts these days, but if they are, then having an analog environment for backlogs, for visualizing work, and with that tactility that people can interact with, really transforms the environment rather than interacting through a digital interface and screen.
Correct.
Yeah.
And to be able to draw inputs from them on what they want to be covered or addressed, and then putting it up visually. This whole idea of S3 gives this possibility of being able to engage with a group of 30 people, 40 people in very less time.
Yeah.
Which is otherwise, if one person starts to talk and then he goes on for half an hour, you can't do that in a conventional mode. But when you really time box it, and when you have this ability to really draw the data and then use it back and really draw the data, that is very powerful in corporate trainings.
Yeah, so inviting people to share summaries of the drivers that interest them, and share something about the intended outcomes they have for a program like that, and then visualizing that, prioritizing that, helps people to have the ownership, but also to really focus what you'll work with. Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. So that's something about your work with corporations. I know. So there's a few things that I know you're involved with, the homeschooling community there in India, and also you mentioned about the Democratic Education Conference that's taking place right now. I take it this is covering both children and adults as well. But could you say something about your work with education in general, and how you're pulling in S3 in those contexts?
Yeah, the point is, in most of the Indian schools, I don't know, maybe even across the world, people don't tend to give voice of the students any importance. People tend to tell them what to study, and they compete against ranks and they move on. So in India, it is quite a lot of education institutions are in that format. So coming from from a S3 world, to be able to not silence the child's voice is very important. And so in a homeschooling place, we tend to give them a certain space. We tend to value the voice of the child and then engage with it consistently. And so when we have a group of people come together as a community, so now how do we do this? Should we listen to the children completely, or should we follow the children completely? I will tell you one more example from my workshop experience of how we do this. Okay, I have a workshop specifically on S3 with NLP. So what we do is we bring in all these people, because many times when people come to a workshop, they do not know what they want. So they say something, but that is not connected to actually how they can operate in their life, or what is the bottleneck that there is in their life. So one of the key things is when I go on to use driver mapping, so I ask them the questions on, who would they want to impact, and what would they like to see differently, and what skills do they need to be able to do this. And then they do this whole mapping for one day. They come up with the entire capabilities which are required for them to enact change in their lives. Otherwise they are quite ambiguous. Okay. So now after they do this whole thing, we put it up visually in charts that these are the capabilities that they need to develop. And then I go on to explain what are all the models we have in NLP which will enhance their capabilities. Okay. And we give an overview of these models, and then these models are put up separately. And every day, the group has to come together in designing what models that they wanted me to cover for that day. Okay. And for this discussion, sometimes they can go on for a day and not decide. So I have to give them an S3 process of how they can quickly come up with the decision making to be able to do what is not perfect, but what they can live with and what they can save for them to go on. So this way, quickly they learn. The first time they try, and then they go on for half an hour, and somebody who is louder voice comes up with a plan. And then I really ask, is this what the group wanting, or is it this person who is wanting? So this becomes a habit day by day, and they become very good. And every day they cover. See, as a trainer, I will not be able to cover all the models in the given day. We have to compromise, because if you go depthfully in one model, they enjoy, but what is relevant for them gets missed out, because there are different people and they have different needs. So when we actually put through this model, they are under constraint. They say, okay, we want this model, but we want that model also. So let's time box this, let's time box that. And they are happy to say, okay, we can't do certain models, which is fine. In the earlier case, if I say that, they would say, we are really unhappy because this model was very important. There will be one guy who would say that. But now it's a group decision, and everybody had a voice, and everybody designed it. So everybody pulled it to their needs. So I am very much relieved. I just come back and say, give me my plan. There's how much time. So, and also people see that they just don't go and learn NLP as a prescribed format or a syllabus which is being taught. They are able to really participate into the subject and really pull the things which are relevant to their lives. And so this dynamics is very, very different. And I also come back with good feedback at the end of the course, because I have addressed the whole thing they had a chance to do it themselves. So I'm no more to be blamed. It's amongst themselves. So there's a far more acceptance. Yeah. So this is the method I feel can be implemented in schools, in homeschooling communities, because in anywhere when people come and they wanted to pursue their outcomes from a conference or anywhere, this kind of tension giving and taking and sharing is what I look is very effective. But in many places that doesn't happen. Many places people take over power. For example, there's no time, so I will make the choices. And then there are a part of people who are like, oh, these choices are not effective for us, So we go through this confusion in every community. And now when I am part of this community, I, rather than getting caught up with this and getting resigned or getting upset about all this, I watch it, I enjoy it. I, find out these areas where it can be touched and what patterns which can be opened up for the group to become effective. And then I start to, so it gives me a platform to talk about, to sometimes disrupt what's going on. So that is I feel is very key in community building, because otherwise there is always this minority who is in power, who takes over, and the majority is always kept quiet, and that goes on for years. So it kind of becomes a disruption. But I if I am there, I have to do it, because I can't just manage with other things. So we manage it that way and we move on. So there are sometimes we have had great experiences. Sometimes we have had some tough experiences. But I think that becomes a very, very defining moment of do you want to live what you speak? It brings us to that space often. And people who are open really goes further into that.
Well, you were saying to me as we were preparing for this call, that sometimes what people say in terms of their aspirations for participation, for bringing more equivalence into communities, is quite different from what actually ends up happening. And the tragedy is that, well, the road to hell is paved with good intent, right? And it's often people are really invested in their habitual ways of doing things, because at some point in their life that genuinely was the most appropriate way for them to proceed, and they're just kind of lacking an alternative. So by inviting people to be self-responsible, right, to from the beginning to focus on what it is that they need, what their expectations are, and to invite this participatory element into the decision making, where it's not just one who can hijack the group according to their own whims, but also there needs to be some kind of consultation, but with peers as well. Really invites consciousness into the decision-making process, invites people to think for themselves about what would be most appropriate, to confront those moments when there's some tension between apparently polarized or differing points of view, and find the both and more. And on top of all of that, in the workshop context, to kind of thank you at the end of it for confronting them with themselves, and through their experience discovering other ways that they can approach their collaboration with others and approach their life as well, in whatever context that might be. Yeah, that sounds like fulfilling, meaningful, and really important work. I often think, because we work on the unconscious patterns of people, there is a signature that everybody carries unconsciously, in the way that they operate. And now I feel every community has an unconscious signature to it, and it repeats like a pattern. It's like, over time, some people come into this places, some people go into the places where they are victims. It repeats itself. And with NLP, we can spot this happening. Okay. And with S3, we can stop it. We can actually bring it to a point where this person who's telling stories has to come to this one sentence, kind of change. And whether this change is possible, whether they are okay with it, whether they want to do it. And if they want some help with moving from this pattern to that pattern, NLP can offer a lot of methods to it. Can facilitate this change very nicely. And something you say there, I think, is a really important point, is if they want it. And this is something I've been learning over the years. It's like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. It's like it's very easy from the outside to observe others' habitual behaviors and patterns, and to see all of the problems with those behaviors. But it's transformation really begins with the internal wish for something different, right? And this is something that I've been learning through interacting with S3 is it's not about change for change's sake, but by identifying drivers that are important to us as individuals and in collaborative endeavors, and prioritizing those, and really connecting with why our current way of doing things is inadequate to bring about the results we'd like to achieve, is a great foundation for energizing the discipline required to confront those habitual behaviors and invest energy into exploring alternatives. And of course, when most vulnerable, all of us tend to fall back even more strongly on those habits. Yeah, so in the moment of greatest need for an alternative, it's very often the time we revert back to the very behavior that's now bringing about the things we want to avoid. So in your work, what I hear is you're bringing awareness to that whole narrative, that whole dynamic, from beginning to end, and through helping people to recognize that, it's giving them a greater opportunity to consciously intervene with themselves and with the cultural norms within which they operate and interact with others. And S3 patterns offers some options. I mean, there's many patterns, right? But S3 patterns themselves can offer some options for people to steer in a different direction, to try something else. And as I like to say, at that interface between the habits and the new, there's this potential for greater consciousness residing.
Yeah. And I want to say one more. S3 offers some options, but S3 also offers the flexibility or the approach for them to design what could be meaningful for them. Mm-hmm. So that is very, very, useful.
Yeah.
And for them to be able to do that, the first thing is they will have to be able to interact meaningfully, and then the concerned decision making steps in. So that it starts with this little tools, but it eventually leads them towards what they want as a community and how they can design it and how they can be effective. So that way, the principles are really powerful.
Yeah. So not only ownership of the problems, the challenges and opportunities they face, but also ownership of how to go about responding to that.
Correct.
You mentioned meaningful. I heard it said the question was posited. Do you think there's a direct correlation between the degree of meaningfulness of something in somebody's life and the willingness to take responsibility?
Yeah. In NLP we have a lot of experience in working with people, negotiate change or to identify the need to change. Mm-hmm. For example, I'll go back to this example because we've used it. Okay, this is a hypothetical case I'm explaining. For example, when I'm telling this lady not to tell stories, okay, and if she doesn't stop, if she doesn't want to change, now what do I do as an NLP trainer? So one of the key things that I do is then I model her, and then I start telling stories without non-stop. And then, that is a way of challenging her to see herself in me. And so she just gets put off, it's like, how can I work on? So we have several methods to help them identify with the need to see it meaningful, so that they would like to take action on it, So I call it basically as healing. When you are governed by a pattern which is coming from the past, and you are still a victim to that pattern, you are not healed. You are still going through the pain. That is why you are operating from that space. And now to come to a consciousness that the time is not the same, it's changed. And now there is a new environment and I don't have to repeat the same cycle. And then helping them to come to this place requires some sort of balancing the mind and calming the mind rather than it falling back on a reaction mode. Mm-hmm. So this work, I call it as healing in NLP. Mm-hmm. So we usually take these patterns and talk about it. And we also hypothetically look at the future saying these patterns can lead you towards these circumstances in the future, which is like your past. Do you want it? That way we can kind of do a mathematical modeling of these patterns and predict something in the future. And then this much, and then we come back to a calm space is healing. Okay. But to be effective is where S3 steps in. Because we now have the patterns of, okay, now you operate like this, you will get results. And then check out how much you want to do, in which context and how much you want to go. But, NLP comes from a mindset of what works, what would work. This is what constantly drives me in my NLP space. So I would go, will S3 work in this context? That is how my brain will work. In S3, what is happening is, what is effective? Because that's what I modeled from you. How can we improve the value of our time together? This is what goes on in a S3 mindset. And what are the ways and means to do that? So it's almost like, we bring in this consciousness from the past, painful place of reaction to this place, which is a lot of work.
Sure. Well, I think, again, you hit another key point there that's got relevance in so many different collaborative contexts. It's a lot of work. And one of the, I wouldn't call it an excuse, but one of the explanations of absence of investing in time in new ways of doing things is, well, we're just so busy. We're just so busy dealing with what we have, and there's this kind of vicious circle, right? Because it's like, if you don't break the circle, then a lot of the challenges in the moment and the busyness flows out of poor decision making from the past, right? And operating on habitual behaviors, and the more stressful it is, the more unconscious we can become, and the more reactive we become, and so on. So at what point do you break the cycle? And again, for me, my conclusion is that that's an individual moment, right? It's not like you can go into an organization and just awaken everybody to the consequences of their actions, right? It requires individuals to be humble and to be vulnerable, to take a look and realize, wait a minute, I'm complaining about all these things, but I'm actually an integral part in creating my own misery, and so it takes some courage, but probably the courage comes out of that moment of realization where we've banged our head against the wall so many times now, where it's adequately uncomfortable, and the consequences are so far away from what we would wish to achieve that we take a look and say, well, wait a minute, do I really want this outcome, or is there an alternative, and what would be required to get there? And I see NLP and S3 patterns both provide that step for people, to climb out of themselves and pursue a path which, well, you call it healing, and I call it transformation, or kind of returning home, to a greater expression of ourselves than the habits we fell into. Yeah. Okay. Well, I really enjoyed the conversation. We're coming toward the end of the time we dedicated to this, our own time box for the call. I wanted to ask you if there's anything else you'd like to bring, and also just to check with you prior to that. I remember when you came to Europe and you were participating in a couple of courses, and we stayed together during those days in between as well, and it was a fun time. And I remember at one moment you said to me, James, I'm not really here to learn more about S3 patterns, but I'm here to watch you, and look at the patterns behind the patterns. And I was very curious about that, because obviously I've got my own unconscious ways of doing things, and I wasn't going to invite you to kind of disclose all of that right now, but I did want to ask you a little bit about that, like what was going on for you, and what were you observing, like the patterns behind the patterns in S3? Is there anything you could say about that for people?
Yeah, from NLP point, I was basically modeling you. And basically the reason why I came into S3 itself is, one of the reasons is I could see you operate in a very beautiful way with people. There was something about the way you operated which made the place more collaborative, effective, and loving and compassionate. It was a beautiful combination. Okay. You could talk about a lot of things, but you were doing some things, okay, which sometimes you may not have not known by yourself. So that is one of the reasons why I always, I said this man is very resourceful and dynamic, and is I'm admiring him, so I need to find out what am I admiring, So you coming to India was a good time to capture some of this. And for me to come to UK and watch you, like especially how you prepare before the workshop, I still remember the bread toast, how you just went back and said, it has to go in this way and not this way, because there will be a little place which will not be toasted, and and that was like, your brain is working on how to be effective, how do we be the best of what is possible in the environment for everybody, and for me to integrate that in my consciousness, into my way of life, I think is paramount on all the tools. Because only if I have this attitude, these tools will be very effective. So so that was what was very catchy, and it was nice to see, because what I see is, even if you train a bunch of S3 trainers, each one is going to be differently capable. Each one is going to do things differently. So to really see what you are doing differently, because you have a lot of experience and how this whole idea of S3 evolved into you, and what is that you're doing. So I think it is deeply connected to your personality, of how you were operating. So that was a treat for me. I mean, I got a lot of things, in the way that, like, I could do a James in a training. May not be 100%, but at least I know what I'm aiming for and go in for that. There's only one thing that I would like to say and end. From NLP, I have really trained myself to be in an empty zero space to absorb patterns, because this is something that I've done throughout the last 20 years. So I can come into a place and I can just be not knowing, and then I can see what repeats and I can catch them. Okay. But from S3, I come there and the whole operation is different. You have an agenda which is agreed upon, and you stick to that agenda, and you do have an agenda even before you agree upon, and then you interact and you create a consensus, or you change the agenda based on what other people say. So there's a lot of thing that is holding on, running in your mind, which you are trying to streamline and control. And this was new to me from the world of NLP coming into S3, because I wouldn't come like that. I would like to see the pattern flow and then catch the bottleneck and then open out, then catch the bottleneck and then open out. So I really go behind the flow. Okay. And now what I'm learning with S3 is, there are times when I can go ahead of the flow, and there are methods and tools for it. And how do we do that? That is what. So now when I come back, I really think of, do I take charge of the flow? Do I go behind the flow? I think these are two things between NLP and S3.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Thank you, Ashok. Okay, well, I want to thank you again for taking time out of today to join me. I know we'd planned it a long time ago, but I think having a newborn yesterday and getting back from the hospital just an hour before our call is a good reason to have not shown up today. So I really appreciate that. And I'm really grateful for what you've shared today. And I hope that it brings value to others as well in the world.
Thank you, James. It's been a very, very lovely time. Every time we talk and discuss, a lot of things come out. And I really, really enjoyed connecting to you again after a long time. And I really hope to see where this goes. And this, a part of you is always with me. So I'm always happy that way. Thank you.
Yeah. Likewise, Ashok. Thank you so much.